Welcome to the Tokenized Economy. Here is today's explainer on token standards as system language. Okay, let's dive right in. If you've been following along with us, you'll remember that in an earlier part of this journey, we explored token standards in quite a bit of detail. We looked closely at foundational examples, things like ERC20, ERC721, ERC1155, ERC1400, and ERC3643. Now, at that stage, we were primarily viewing these as technical building blocks, right? Just the underlying plumbing. But today, we really need a perspective shift. We're going to revisit these exact same standards, but from a completely different angle. We're not just looking at them as protocols or standards anymore, but rather as the actual language of the system. Section 1. Standards as system language. So what does this all mean? Well, the crucial point here is that absolutely every system operates on a language. And a language fundamentally defines three things: how information is structured, how participants interpret that information, and how the different components actually interact with one another. Without a shared language, well, things just break down. Systems cannot integrate effectively, automation becomes highly inconsistent, and trying to scale the whole shebang becomes incredibly difficult. Now, in tokenized systems, token standards play this exact role. They are the language. They define exactly how an asset is represented, how the ownership is structured, how transfer behavior works, and how permissions and restrictions are enforced. And why does this matter for the big picture? It's simple. Because this shared language ensures that entirely different systems can interpret the exact same asset in a consistent, predictable way. It's an absolute game changer. Section 2. Across blockchain ecosystems. Token standards are so often discussed solely in the context of Ethereum, but the concept is actually way broader than that. On Ethereum, as many of us know, ERC20 defines fungible tokens, ERC721 defines non-fungible tokens, and standards like ERC1400 and ERC3643 extend this to permissioned and regulated assets. But we see the exact same necessity over on Solana. Their SPL token standard manages basic token creation, while Token 2022 extends it with complex features like transfer restrictions, metadata handling, and enhanced control. And if we look at enterprise use cases, take the Canton Network, for example. Asset models there are defined through DAML-based templates, and these templates embed the rules, permissions, and workflows directly into the asset definition itself. So what's the common thread? The crucial takeaway is that across all of these ecosystems, the goal is exactly the same: to express asset behavior in a standardized, machine-readable form. Section 3. Execution and interoperability. Now, in distributed systems, language isn't just about structure. It is also about execution. Different ecosystems use entirely different programming models. Ethereum uses Solidity, Solana uses Rust, and Canton uses DAML. These programming models are fundamentally important. Why? Because they define how logic is written, how rules are actively enforced across the network, and how state changes are actually executed. In a previous discussion, we explored interoperability as coordinating state across systems. But coordination is not just about connectivity. It's not just plugging a wire in. It requires systems to actively interpret asset behavior, to understand execution logic, and to perfectly align on outcomes. Naturally, having different standards and programming models introduces massive translation challenges across systems. This is exactly why interoperability is not just about moving assets from point A to point B. It is fundamentally about ensuring consistent interpretation across completely different languages and systems. Overcoming these translation challenges leads to some very real, very powerful functional advantages. Because of token standards, custody systems can seamlessly recognize assets, smart contracts execute completely predictable workflows, marketplaces can easily list them, and true, effective cross-system interoperability actually becomes possible. Let's look at a direct comparison. In traditional financial systems, asset definitions are buried deep in legal documents. Interpretation varies widely across institutions, and endless manual reconciliation is required. But in tokenized systems, behavior is standardized, the rules are embedded right at the representation layer, and interpretation is universally consistent. Section 4. The bigger insight. This right here is the absolute core of everything we've talked about today. Listen closely to this. Tokenization does not scale simply because assets are digital. It scales because assets are standardized and machine-readable. If we connect this to literally everything we've discussed so far, smart contracts define execution, custody defines control, settlement defines state transition, interoperability defines coordination, and privacy defines trust. Therefore, token standards are the key. They define exactly how assets are universally understood across the entire system. Every financial system needs a language. In tokenized markets, token standards form that language. Interoperability depends not just on a technical connection, but on a shared understanding of that language. So as traditional finance continues to merge with blockchain, the big question is whose language will ultimately become the global standard. Subscribe for short explainers on blockchain, tokenization, and financial markets, and share your questions or topics you'd like us to cover in the comments.